Excuse me for doing the video while I'm taking a bath, but the thought just occurred to me, and I was just watching the Borough Media. It's a British social media platform. I recommend that you tune into it because even though you may not live in the UK. Plain fact of the matter is it's all interconnected, especially the Western European countries. They are just as insane, just as criminal in their policies, in their outright utter stupidity, because and that's because they're even more insane. The constant talk in the European as well as in the U.S. and even in Australia and other places that have had to suffer for centuries from Western European colonialism, which has brought us to the current state of affairs in the world. They have basically been on a tear, a plundering, pillaging tear to just get it at the instant moment material gratification, which brings with it the semblance of power and control, which is completely and utterly illusionary. And they're working themselves to the point where they're actually they're actually metaphorically digging their own graves. But this is beside the point. The point I'm trying to make is, Trump made a comment as well as Lieutenant Governor of Texas and others who have made this in the media and so on and so forth, including those like Ben. What's his name? Ben Shapiro and as well as Todd. I think Todd is either the first name or the second name. I think it's actually no. I think it's the second name. These guys have big platforms, but they are just part of the insane machine of winner take all, of give me what's mine, bitch mentality. They are completely and utterly unhinged, and they're the ones applauding, like say Trump coming in saying, let's not make the cure have the cure worse than the disease. And so I want to point out a few things of how the cure is worse than the disease. And this is a truth-based fact. Cancer treatment. The cure of radiation and chemotherapy is worse than the disease. Why do I say this? Well, because chemotherapy and radiation basically, so when you have cancer, it means that you have a compromised immunity. And you're going to use methods that are going to further destabilize that compromised immunity. You're going to further weaken the body's ability to fight back. Another example, HIV/AIDS. Now, I watched the video, and I tried finding it, and I haven't been able to come up with it. But I watched the video from one of the leading people in bio in viral and bio bacterial infections, and he was talking about it when AIDS became hot. It was in the media constantly, and so on and so forth. And he, in this video, points out a lot of things, including documentation and other stuff that the CDC, the FDA, as well as the corporations and so on and so forth, were basically lying about, as well as the politicians. And he mentions some NGOs in there. So and as well as protest groups, largely the gay community. And the thing is he points out that basically what AIDS was a compromising of the the immune system, but it had nothing to do with a non-existent disease that was made up. And if you do enough research, you'll see that there's a ton of diseases which didn't exist, like restless leg syndrome and all this other stuff, that suddenly became diseases. So what he pointed out was that it was a known fact that heavy drug use compromises your immune system, and that every case of AIDS had direct links to that, and that the gay community heavily used drugs. And so, of course you're gonna compromise your immunity. And that's not to say just the gay. It's people who aren't gay, who have heavy drug use, who compromise their immunity. Now, I'm not one to validate the war on drugs, because I'm not one to be dictatorial and vindictive and create a paradigm which is we're going to say that that this is a huge problem, even though we created the problem. And prime example of creating the problem on war on drugs is that the British government, the Russian government, that was before the fall of the that was before the fall of the Tsars of Russia. As well as almost every single Western European country, and other colonial sites that had garnered political and financial and propaganda power, which includes Canada, was involved in the opium trade into China, which gave Hong Kong to Great Britain, and it was the governments who were doing this. It was the governments with private institutions such as the what is it? Oh God, I can't think of it. Great Britain's big private institution that basically, but something trade. I forget it, but it's basically it was a bunch of rich people doing anything and everything to it has something to do with the India trade collective. I think that was, but they were directly connected to the drug trafficking. We have also examples of modern day where in Afghanistan we got U.S. soldiers guarding poppy fields in Afghanistan. We also have the examples of Central and South America where the U.S. Government is directly connected to narco trafficking. So, going back to the AIDS thing, the CDC is directly implicated by the video I saw, and I looked further into it and to other bits, and I was able to confirm what that video talked about. And another case of the cure being worse than the disease was the cure for AIDS, which actually was the biggest contributor of death to those quote-unquote diagnosed with AIDS, HIV. And so the whole point of that, the whole point of this is that it's always a system where those who have wealth and power through political manipulation and economic manipulation and control of manufacturing and production and control of the lands, these are the ones who are directly the ones profiting. And a perfect term is profiteer, which sounds a lot like pirateering. And the thing is during the opium wars in China, it was a pirateer who came in front of the Queen of England at the time and begged her to intervene, because the Emperor of China at the time was like, no, you're not going to get my people hooked on this. You're not going to make them lazy. You're not going to make them stupid. You're not going to kill them with flooding the market, flooding the country with drugs. Not market, but the country with drugs, and promoting heavy usage of it. Now understand, China knew about opium. Traditional Chinese medicine, they used to use opium because they knew it could be a painkiller, but they were more careful about how opioids and other drugs like that were used, and they didn't cut them with and they didn't manufacture or cut them with, like, gasoline or with radiator fluid or any other assortment of additives which are dangerous, so that people will get a quicker high, meaning that it would do more damage. So it is understandable to say that to say that the drug companies and the government and the medical complex uh, is working in tandem to kill off people because it's for that instant uh, material political and power gain, monetary or otherwise. There was a video I remember watching years ago about how the governments, particularly those in the West, are actively trying to kill off as many people as possible. And so it's understandable when you have all these examples and dozens upon dozens to hundreds of thousands of examples of this happening. And the reason why we don't know it because it's not talked about in our education. It's not talked about on our so-called journalistic news media, who is supposed to keep us informed. It's not talked about. Never mind all the dumping of toxic materials to save money, so that the CEOs and the board and the shareholders can make more money. And while they're still getting bailouts to continue, and then you got Alex Azar, or Ozar, who was the Trump pick for the EPA, and he's saying, hey, oh no, I'm sorry, Alex Ozar or Azar, I think he's different, but you got another, you got a fossil fuel ex-CEO and lobbyist who's running the EPA, and he's saying, we're not gonna stop the pollution. We're gonna just because of the coronavirus, the economics. So we're not gonna enforce any of this. He should be in jail, or people should be going and dragging him out and hanging him. But we have Trump with high approvals, yet he's the guy who placed this guy in there. And you have a House of Representatives and Senate who should have stopped it, but they don't. But they should have stopped a whole host of things, but they don't. They often fast track. You got judges going into the Supreme Court, one who blatantly sided with the corporation, saying that the truck driver who had problems with his truck, with the truck, and he was supposed to freeze to death in his truck. To guard what was in the trailer, and that's just one. You have the first black Supreme Court justice, and that's a complete and utter fallacy. But Clarence Thomas, I mean, the guy is just as evil and criminal. You got Sotomayor, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. All of them are monstrous criminals, and yet these people get to stay in office and hold the position till they die. And there's no way because there are no laws, there are no rules that say no. You're a criminal. You not only have to resign, but you need to be prosecuted, and that you are ultimately a traitor. You got Trump and they say Trump and the Republicans, but the Democrats are directly culpable for putting in all these right wing, and several of them are racist, elitists going into the federal court. Thousands of them. You know, you often hear about this court or that court, stopped Trump's policies, and yet you notice that the policies keep going. And you have media, even those on the left, they're parroting this, but they're not saying, what the hell's the use of doing it if nothing is done to stop it? Where are the people going to jail? Where is the accountability? You got none of this, and you got a media filled with criminals rooting and cheerleading this. Oh, I'm sorry. So not Todd. It's Tim Pool. That's the guy I was talking about. Not Todd. Tim Pool. He's going out and saying China is trying to kill people in the West. That China was the negligent one. That China is the enemy of the Western world. Typical. Iran is the enemy of the Western world. Russia is the enemy of the Russian world. Syria is the enemy of the Western world. Afghanistan is the enemy of the Western world. Yemen is the enemy of the Western world. Haiti, Venezuela, Bolivia. Cuba. And yet, no one seems to understand that there's an interconnectivity. If you kill the natural world, and you kill it by doing policies, wars, sanctions, where you give the profiteers the ability to plunder and pillage the natural world, when you give the ability for them to commit planet-wide genocide by producing climate change, human-driven climate change, it's not, yes, humans are largely hold a good responsibility, but it's the profiteers, these uber criminals, who drove it with the complicit help of the governments. And yet, we have news, China was shutting down its coal-fired power plants. And doing yet, all of a sudden, there was this pivot to Asia, centering on China. And so China, who was working to build a renewable, eco-friendly energy grid, was forced to power up its coal-fired power plants, so that they could expedite the work that they were doing. And so you remember all the news clips where China fired up its coal plants. They're such hypocrites. They're taking shipments from North Korea for coal. And now China is not doing it because the West has pressured them. No, China was cut back on taking coal because China got to the point where they were planting billions upon billions of trees. They have the biggest solar and wind power capabilities. They have last report 70% of their country is now driving electric vehicles. You got all this, and then you also have the constant rhetoric from the World Bank to the IMF to the Western governments, and the World Bank and the IMF are basically tools of the West. So they're going on about predatory loan lending by China, except it was the West who produced it and used through the IMF and the World Bank. But China's lending policy are flawed. It is definitely flawed. Still, they actually listen, and they actually negotiate, and they actually take steps to correct the flaws. And it's not just to and Chinese lending isn't just to Africa or the Middle East or South America or Central America. It's being done in Australia. It's being done in Eastern Europe. It's being done in Greece. It's being done everywhere. The whole New Belt and Road, which is the new version of the Silk Road, is to connect everything and have a more sane capitalistic economy. That's what China is trying to do. And everywhere that the Western governments are involved, and Western corporations and Western multinationals are concerned, it's pillage, rape, and plunder. And when I say I'm not talking about I'm not just talking about raping of women, which there is, but I'm talking about the raping of the natural world, the pillaging and plundering, destabilizing and destroying. We have reports of mass species die-off of not just mammals, but aquatic life, but of insect life, bird life, and we have reports of bacterial and viral increases in bad bacterial and viral factors, because the bacteria and viruses that are more symbiotic and help are being killed off because of the insane cure, which is capitalism. That's an example of the cure being worse. The cure being worse than the actual disease. And if you've been paying attention, you know, the trillions of this of so-called money, which, by the way, you should understand that they're not printing this; it's just digitally manufactured. So they're not even using a actual physical printing press. No. This is Couple strokes of the keyboard, and whoop, voila, trillions. Yet the people who will get this illusionary $1,200, which won't help them in the immediate or in the future. That's also another stroke of the keyboards. But you notice how the wealthiest can get at it immediately, but we can't. There's bureaucracy. The government is inefficient, and that's the narrative being put out. No, they're not being. This is purposely done, and yet we continue to fall in line with the system. We continue to call it out when what we should be doing is opting out. What we should be doing is telling them to go, give them the big middle finger, and if they come, we should be armed and pointing our guns at them and telling them, you got one chance to get the fuck out, or we're going to put a bullet between your eyes. We don't have that. Why? Because we've been so propagandized, so brainwashed. We've been told how stupid we are. Because that's ultimately what it is. When they give a narrative which has no real world ramifications, which except for telling us we're stupid, we're lazy, that we have no aspirations, ambitions, that we should be fuck you all, give me mine, because that's ultimately what it comes down to, and what's been promoted for over 40 years through all sectors. Whether you go watch a movie, whether you go watch listen to music, it's all of that, or TV shows. It's all of that. There is no critical thinking. And the reason why is they don't want you to think critically. They don't want you to question. They don't want you to have an imagination. They don't want you to have curiosity. Because that protects them. Which is why we have these so-called media journalists and anchors talking complete and utter insane BS and making these narratives, which is why the media is hated. If we hate the media so goddamn much, why aren't we putting the boots on the ground? Why aren't we charging through? And why aren't we threatening them with their lives? Why aren't we going to the residences of the Koch brothers, the Mercers, the Mnuchins, the Trumps, the Schumers, the Pelosi's, the Dianne Feinstein, Sheldon Adelson, that criminal bimbo who's the Secretary of Education, or DeVos, Betsy DeVos, and her brother, who's the one that started Blackwater, Eric Prince. Why aren't we going to them, to their residences, and threatening them with their lives? Why aren't we going and marching on the papal seat in Rome? Why aren't we going to the mansions of the Roman Catholic bishops and cardinals, dragging them out? Why? because we continue to bow down and bend the knee because we are bluntly stupid. We don't think critically. We don't think in self-enlightenment, not individually or collectively. This is why all this talk about prophecy, apocalypse, and the second coming, this is why it proliferates. This is why people have it constantly on their minds. It's because it was an engineered narrative. And when you see a video done by somebody who actually did the research, who actually got a degree, it says, and they're talking about actual world history, about how Christianity was a fabrication of a general who became the emperor of Rome, and how the heads of the church were all minor nobility, or those who already had wealth, obscene wealth. And this is discounted. Why? Because during the time, the ruling class were making the value of the currency by manipulating, by physically changing the weight of the silver and copper and gold, so that the currency didn't have the value. Because old currency like that had to do with weight and purity. How much purity? It's the same thing that's happening now. But you got people that are talking about, going back to the gold standard. But that's fiat currency as well. There's no value of gold or silver or any of that without the value that is created by us buying into the system. When we should be, as a community, getting together and placing a communal value, so that those who are helping to produce and work to produce our basic needs, such as food, we should be placing a value on that. Those who whether through education or just curiosity, and want to create innovation, we should be placing value on those, but on a communal base. That doesn't mean that they get privileges, outsized privileges. No, it means that they are held in respect. That when they need help to produce what we all need, whether it's an innovation or producing food, we should be volunteering to do that, to enhance the community. Whether it's electricity, water, food, the production of new innovations, and the distribution, we should all be volunteering to do that without the exchange of money or favors. That's how we advance. I did a whole video on that, on how if we can have build a system where we seed we see biometric sensors, which helps to alert us about our health, our diet, as well as what criminal behavior is being done among us, so that when we do have a community-based based trial, we don't have to rely on hearsay. We can say, hey, look, you've been saying this in private while you're saying this other thing in public and doing actions that align with your private or your actions in private. It's cut and dry. And I'm not talking about just a simple audio or visual. I'm talking about a very complex system which we are completely technologically capable of doing, because each of us has a different thermal variant that's unique, just like our fingerprints. How our eyes and our bioretinal signatures, how our voice, how our breathing, how our neurons fire, how our emotional variants go. This is sort of biometrics I'm talking about. It helps in many good ways, but it also cuts back on the BS. We can eliminate bureaucracy. We don't need to work if we use that to build on automation, so we can center on learning and being able to think critically and innovating, so that we can leave a better world where we're not spread out. We're not so spread out that where this individualism of, we need to have home these suburbs and so on and so forth. When we could have all the amenities, but we could define ourselves to smaller amounts of land, which also includes farming. We could have modern agriculture, but without the excessive use of land, meaning we'd have more trees and other vegetation, and we'd have more of the animals out there that we also consume for food. Because I'm not one of these that says, oh, you need to go vegan. Because with all the BS around the, vegan is so healthy and so on and so forth, understand that's not completely true. Yes, it's healthy, but it's also healthy to have protein in the meat variety.
Message is received
in your life.
from Mike Mahan.
So the whole system that we live under, the cure is worse than the problem and the disease. That's the whole point of this. And unless we start thinking critically, unless we start to understand that ultimately we are contributing to our own downfall, something that we are fully capable of preventing, and we don't come up with the solutions that I've talked about on this video and other videos, and we understand that borders are artificial and that they don't exist, that they're not reality, that home is the planet, the natural world which provides us everything we need and doesn't demand in return. Understand, we have become the the demonic predators, the destroyers, when we buy into the system. It's hedonism. Hedonism is insanity. You can call it consumerism, you can call it hedonism, you can call it whatever you want. It's insane. It's self-destructive. And it's self-fulfilling. Why? Because we buy into it. Alright, thank you for your time.